Lesson 8.1a, Probability and Simple Events. The probability of a simple event is a ratio that compares the number of favorable outcomes to the number of. Here is example 2. A multiple of 3 is where you multiply 3 times numbers. So 3 times 1 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, and so on. So multiples of 3, 3, 6, 9, and 12. But on that number cube, the ones that are multiples of 3 are just 3 and 6. So there are 2 favorable outcomes over 6 possible outcomes because there's 6 sides on that number cube. So 2 over 6 would reduce. And you're going to give your probabilities today in reduced fractions. So 1/3 would be your probability of rolling a multiple of 3. If you have to give a percentage, you would take 1 divided by 3, and you're going to get a decimal. You move that decimal 2 places, and you get 33.3% when you round off. Now we're going to talk about complementary. At the beginning we said complementary events are opposites. They're the only things that can happen. It's when there are just 2 things that can possibly happen. The sum of the probabilities of complementary events is 1. So example 2 says, what is the probability of not rolling a multiple of 3? So we're talking about multiple of 3. We said we're 3, 6, 9, and 12, and so on. If I look at this number cube, not a multiple of 3, would that be 1?
It would be 4, 6.
Is 1 a multiple of 3? No. So 1 is a possibility. What about 2? No. What about 3?
Yes.
3 is a multiple, so we don't want to count it. What about 4?
Yes. No. Yes.
And what about 5?
Yes. No.
And then 6 is a multiple. So 4 are not out of 6 possible, so 2/3. Now, they're showing you something different right here. The probability of something plus the opposite, the probability of the opposite adds to 1. So if the probability of being a multiple of 3 is 1/3, if you subtract that from 1, you would get 2/3. The probability of not rolling a multiple of 3 is 2/3. It would also be 100 minus 33.3%, 66.7%. Now, let's try some examples. We have a set of 30 cards. They're numbered 1 to 30. You're going to pick a card at random without looking at it. Find the probability of each event and write as a fraction in simplest form. So we're doing all fractions. So on these 30 cards, what's always going to be the bottom possible outcomes? What's the possible outcomes always? 130. It's going to be always out of 30. So what's the probability of number 1 drawing a 12? How many 12s then are on those number cards? How many 12s are there when you number 1 to 30? 1. 1 12 out of how many altogether? 30. Probability is 1/30. What about a 2 or a 3? How many 2s are there in the deck? How many 2s are in the deck? 1. How many 3s are in the deck? So how many of 2 or 3? There's 2 of them. Out of 30, does that reduce? 1/15. 1 out of 15. What about the probability of drawing an odd number? How many of those are odd if I'm numbering 1 to 15? 15 out of 30, which would be what? 1/2. A multiple of 5. So let's think about what multiples of 5 are. Reese, what's the first multiple of 5?
1. No, 5.
5. Give me the next one. Reese. 10, and then
15.
keep going.
20.
20.
25.
Okay. Okay.
30.
Is there any more on that in that deck of cards? There's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Is that it? On cards numbered 1 to 30. How many are there then? Count how many numbers you told me. How many numbers are there?
6.
6. How many cards are in the whole deck?
30.
So does 6 over 30 reduce, Reese?
Yeah.
To
Yes, it does. Oh, yes.
1 over 5. So the probability of getting a multiple of 5 is 1/5. Now, what about not a multiple of 5? If 1/5 is the probability of getting a multiple of 5, what's the probability of not a multiple of 5? Remember, it's the opposite.
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8.
It's
9,
everything
24.
but that. So we can do it that way. So 24 out of 30, which would be how much?
You can't reduce that.
Yeah, you can.
12.
That'd be 4/5.
4/5. Now, look at this. 1/5 and 4/5. Doesn't 1/5 plus 4/5 equal 1 whole?
Yeah.
That's how you know the difference. The complementary or the opposites should add up to 1. We didn't have to do 24 over 30. We could have just said, okay, if 1/5 is the multiples of 5, then 4/5 has to be everything else, not the multiple of 5. What about probability of less than or equal to 10? How many cards are less than or equal to 10? 10. How many cards altogether?
30.
30. So what's the probability of getting less than or equal to 10? 1/3. Are there any questions?
So this is the homework.
Yep.
It's easy.